The night was thick with silence, the kind of silence that hangs heavy over a small town in the Mississippi Delta. It was the kind of silence that could make a man's heart pound just a little louder, as if the world was listening. In a modest two-room shack on the edge of Tupelo, a baby boy was born. It was January 8, 1935, and the world didn't yet know what to make of him. Vernon Presley, the baby's father, was a man of few words and even fewer opportunities. He had grown up poor, just like his own parents, and he knew the weight of hard times. Gladys, the baby's mother, was a woman of quiet strength, her eyes always carrying a hint of worry. They had already lost one child, a stillborn boy named Jesse Guerin, just a few minutes before this new arrival. The loss was a silent grief that hung over the small family, a reminder of the fragility of life. But this new baby, with his bright blue eyes and a shock of dark hair, seemed to bring a glimmer of hope. They named him Elvis Aaron Presley. Vernon and Gladys held him close, their hearts filled with a mix of joy and fear. Joy for the life they had brought into the world, and fear for what the future might hold. Elvis's early years were marked by poverty and struggle. The Great Depression was a shadow that loomed over every aspect of life in Tupelo. Vernon worked odd jobs, anything to put food on the table. Gladys, a seamstress, mended clothes, and did laundry for others to help make ends meet. The family moved frequently, always searching for a better life, but they rarely found it. They lived in a series of small, rented houses, each one a little more dilapidated than the last. Despite the hardships, Elvis's parents tried to create a sense of normalcy for their son. Gladys, in particular, doted on him, her love a constant source of comfort. She taught him to sing, her voice blending with his as they harmonized on gospel songs. Music was their escape, a way to forget the struggles of daily life, if only for a little while. Elvis was a quiet boy, often lost in his own thoughts. He was different from the other kids in the neighborhood, a bit of a loner. He didn't fit in at school, where the other students seemed to have more than he did. But he had a dream that was as big as the sky above Tupelo. He wanted to be a singer, to make people happy with his voice. He would often stand in front of the mirror, practicing his smile, imagining himself on stage, the crowd cheering for him. One day when Elvis was about 7 years old, his father took him to a used car lot. It was there, amidst the rusting cars and the smell of oil, that Elvis saw his first guitar. It was a simple, worn instrument, but to Elvis it was a treasure. He begged his father to buy it for him, and after much pleading, Vernon finally gave in. That guitar became Elvis's constant companion, a tool for his dreams. He would sit on the porch of their small house, strumming the guitar and singing. The neighbors would stop and listen, some smiling, others shaking their heads, but Elvis didn't care. He was lost in the music, his voice carrying the hopes and dreams of a boy who wanted to change his life. As the years passed, Elvis grew, and so did his love for music. He listened to everything he could, from the gospel songs of his childhood to the blues and country music he heard on the radio. He was drawn to the sound of black musicians, their voices full of emotion and soul. He didn't see the color of their skin, he only saw the power of their music. Elvis's parents watched him with a mix of pride and concern. They could see the talent in their son, but they also knew the world could be cruel to a boy with big dreams. They did their best to protect him, to shield him from the harsh realities of life. But they also knew that sooner or later, Elvis would have to face the world on his own. The night was still silent as Elvis lay in his bed, the guitar resting beside him. He closed his eyes, but sleep eluded him. His mind was filled with the sound of music, the songs he had heard and the ones he had yet to create. He knew that the road ahead would be long and hard, but he also knew that he had to try. For his parents, for himself, and for the dream that burned inside him. The next morning, as the sun rose over Tupelo, Elvis picked up his guitar and began to play. The first notes of a new song filled the air, a song that only he could hear, and in that moment the world was listening. Elvis's early years in Tupelo, Mississippi, were marked by poverty and struggle, but also by a deep sense of family and faith. Born in a tiny two-room shack, Elvis and his stillborn twin brother, Jesse, came into the world under the dim light of oil lamps. The loss of Jesse deeply affected Elvis's mother, Gladys, who often wondered if Elvis had somehow absorbed all of Jesse's qualities. She believed Elvis was special, a belief she instilled in him from a young age. Tupelo, a small town with a population of around 6,000, was poor even by the standards of the 1930s. The Presleys' little home had no electricity or running water, and the family relied on a log stove for warmth. Despite the hardships, Gladys was proud of their home, and would often tell Elvis how happy they had been when they first moved in. The family raised chickens, and Elvis would help his mother with chores like picking cotton, a common task in the area. Vernon, Elvis's father, was known for his good looks, but also for his temper and drinking. He struggled to hold down a steady job, which added to the family's financial troubles. When Elvis was 3, Vernon was sent to Parchman State Penitentiary for altering a check. This left Gladys to care for Elvis on her own, often relying on welfare and the support of relatives. During this time, Elvis and Gladys would take long bus rides to visit Vernon at the prison, a journey that Elvis found exciting despite the difficult circumstances. Gladys was a hardworking and devoted mother, but she was also timid and nervous. She always made sure the bills were paid and that the family had food on the table, even when times were tough. Elvis's memories of his childhood were not filled with sadness, but with love and close family bonds. He and his parents shared a single room, and when Vernon was away, Elvis would sleep with his mother, often talking to her in their own baby language. Religion played a significant role in Elvis's life from the beginning. The family attended church regularly, and Elvis would often join in the singing, even as a toddler. One of his favorite hymns was "Peace in the Valley," which painted a picture of a world where even the wolf and the lamb could live in harmony. The church was not just a place of worship, but also a source of entertainment, with lively sermons and congregational singing. Gladys was strict about morality, and would punish Elvis for misdeeds. When he was caught stealing Coca-Cola bottles, she made him confess in front of the entire congregation, a moment that left a lasting impression on him. Despite the challenges, Elvis's parents instilled in him a strong sense of faith and family. When he fell seriously ill with tonsillitis, his parents prayed by his bedside, and Gladys believed his recovery was a sign from God that Elvis was meant for something special. Elvis's early years were shaped by the love and support of his family, the strength of his faith, and the resilience needed to overcome poverty. These experiences would later influence his music, his relationships, and his understanding of the world. Elvis's early life was a mix of joy and hardship. Playing by the creek with other kids was fun, but falling in got him a spanking. He learned to be careful to avoid worrying his mother, who had a temper that could be heard from far away. His mom, Gladys, spoiled him with what little she could, and he grew up with a set of dishes that no one else was allowed to use. Any violation led to a tantrum, which he would often direct at those closest to him. Even as a teenager, he would still get upset over small things, but he always felt guilty afterward. At school, Elvis was shy and polite, always saying "yes, ma'am" and "no, ma'am." He struggled with bad dreams and sleepwalking, which his mother would gently guide him through. His parents, especially Gladys, were determined that he would have a better life than they did. They wanted him to graduate and get a good job. America's entry into World War II brought changes to his small town. At school, the children sang "God Bless America" and "You Are My Sunshine." One time, when he was 7, he sang "You Are My Sunshine" with a little girl named Shirley, pretending to play a toy guitar. He often wondered if he was imagining himself on the Grand Ole Opry, which his family listened to on the radio, sometimes using the car battery for power. Elvis's love for music deepened when he heard Red Foley's "Old Shep." He had a dog named Rex that he adored, but it got sick and had to be put down. The song resonated with him, and he sang it at the Mississippi Algebra Fair and Dairy Show when he was 10. He came 5th in the competition and got free rides, but his mother gave him a whipping, making him feel unloved. When Elvis turned 11, he got his first guitar. It wasn't the bicycle or hunting rifle he wanted, but his mother thought it would help him with his singing. The guitar cost about $7.50, and with a music book and tips from his church pastor, he taught himself to play. Music became a big part of his life, and he started performing at local radio shows where he met Mississippi Slim, a country singer who seemed famous to him. The Presleys moved to the Chackarack area of Tupelo when Elvis was 12. Living near the black community exposed him to new music and culture, despite the segregation. He discovered black rhythm and blues on the radio, although his parents disapproved. He was also self-conscious about his overalls at his new school, Milan Junior High, but he found solace in the library and comic books. Elvis's life in Tupelo was marked by financial struggles. He was determined to help his family, and often dreamed of buying them a fine house and Cadillacs. His father, Vernon, lost his job for bootlegging moonshine, and the family decided to move to Memphis. They sold their furniture, packed what they could, and set off in their old car, hoping for a better future. Memphis was a big change. Elvis, now nearly 14, adapted quickly. He explored the city, which felt exciting and full of possibilities. His mother, however, was initially lonely and anxious. Despite the challenges, Elvis felt a sense of excitement and began to dream more about his future as a star. He would sit in class, looking out the window, thinking about singing and performing. Memphis was where his dreams would start to take shape. The Presleys' life in Memphis started in small, humble boarding houses. These were places where they shared a bathroom and cooked on a hot plate, all crammed into one room. But things changed when Vernon found a job at United Paint Company, and Gladys returned to her old job as a sewing machine operator. Their life felt more settled, especially when Vernon's brother Travis and his wife Lorraine joined them, looking for work too. After a few months, the Memphis Housing Authority gave them an apartment in Lauderdale Courts, a government-funded housing project. Some people might have felt embarrassed about living in the projects, but for the Presleys, it was a huge step up. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, a sitting room, a kitchen, and their very own bathroom. It was the best home they had ever had. Gladys was especially proud, and when the housing officer praised her for keeping everything so clean, she was thrilled. For Elvis, it was a great place to grow up. Memphis was a city of contrasts. While Lauderdale Courts and Humes High School were in a white neighborhood, the heart of Memphis was more diverse. Beale Street, in particular, was a hub of black culture and music. Elvis didn't realize it at the time, but the exposure to race music, as it was called, would deeply influence him. His parents still preferred hymns and country songs, but Elvis was drawn to the blues and rhythm and blues. He loved listening to artists like Big Bill Broonzy and Big Boy Crudup. If he hadn't moved to Memphis, his life and career would have been very different. Humes High School was just 10 blocks from their apartment. When Elvis first saw it, he thought it looked like a prison. He was nervous and stammered a lot, especially with words starting with W. Some kids made fun of his Mississippi accent and his name, which they found unusual. Despite this, he did well in English class, particularly in recitation, even though his grammar was criticized. His teachers and classmates later remembered him as a polite, shy boy. His parents were humble, and that was how he was raised. At first, Elvis didn't bring his guitar to school or sing there, because he was unsure how people would react. His voice was breaking, and he worried it might not come back the way he wanted. But singing was his passion. When his voice returned, he would sit on the stairs of the apartment building, playing his guitar and singing to himself. The echo in the stairwell was perfect for practicing. Not everyone appreciated his music, and some neighbors complained. His dad often said, "I never knew a guitar player who ever made $1," but his mom always encouraged him. On Sundays, the family went to I Assembly of God Church. Elvis was also drawn to gospel groups like the Blackwood Brothers Quartet and the Statesmen, who performed at revival meetings. He loved the excitement of singing with a group. With both parents working, there was more money, but it was still tight. Elvis helped by mowing lawns and earning money to pay the grocery bills. His dad was proud, and his mom always made sure he was keeping up with his schoolwork. Elvis spent a lot of time listening to music on the radio and studying the records he could afford. He learned how to bend notes and use harmonies by listening to artists like Billy Ward of the Dominoes. He would go to Charlie's record store on Saturdays to play the jukebox and buy records, mostly by black artists. He later bought 45s and kept them all his life, as they held special memories. One of the highlights of his early teen years was getting his driver's license. He loved driving around Memphis and taking his mom out to show her the city. This was a big deal for him, and it made him feel more grown up. Around this time, things started changing at school. Elvis began to find himself and reinvent how he wanted to be seen. He started dressing in bright, colorful clothes from stores where black musicians shop. He grew his hair long and added sideburns, trying to look like a young Confederate soldier. He was influenced by the movies, especially westerns, and imagined himself as the star. His hair and clothes made him stand out, and some kids thought he looked weird, but he didn't care. He had a friend, Red West, who stood up for him when other kids tried to cut his hair. Singing was always a big part of Elvis's life. He would perform at parties, but only after the lights were turned off. He loved all kinds of music, from R&B to opera. When he was 17, he performed at a school minstrel show, singing "Till I Waltz Again With You" by Teresa Brewer. To his surprise, the audience loved it. He became more popular after that, and it was a turning point for him. Life in Memphis was shaping Elvis into the person he would become. The city, the music, and the people around him were all part of his journey. Elvis was finally 18, and it felt like he'd been waiting for this moment forever. If it had been up to him, he would have left school years ago. His uncle Vernon would have been all for it, but his mom Gladys wouldn't hear of it. She was adamant that he finish school, and so he did, working nights whenever he could to help out at home. On the evening of June 3, 1953, both his parents were in the audience at the Ellis Auditorium, beaming with pride as he received his high school diploma. It was a big deal, especially since he was the first in his family to graduate. He was proud that night, but more for his mom than for himself. He owed it all to her. But even with his diploma in hand, Elvis still felt lost. He wasn't much of a student. In class, he'd often find himself daydreaming about Tony Curtis and Marlon Brando, imagining himself as a star. He couldn't help it. His mind was always elsewhere, and he often had no idea what the teacher was saying. "I don't really know why they gave me a diploma," he would admit later. "I just sat there and looked out the window." Some of his classmates went on to college, but for Elvis, it wasn't an option. College was for kids from better-off families. His teachers knew it was impossible for him, so they focused on giving him the education he needed to make a living. The Presleys were starting from nothing, and Elvis's earnings were crucial for the family. Since he was 15, he'd worked every summer, taking any job he could find, and he was proud of his ability to contribute. After graduation, he toyed with the idea of joining the Memphis police. The uniform and the camaraderie appealed to him, but mostly he just wanted any job he could get. So the week after he graduated, he went to the Tennessee State Employment Office looking for full-time work. But Elvis's real dream was to sing. He'd read about the Memphis recording service in a newspaper and heard about Sam Phillips, the man who owned it. Phillips was a radio engineer who had left his job to start his own record company, Sun. He recorded blues musicians from Beale Street, like B.B. King and Howlin' Wolf, and leased the tapes to bigger labels. Elvis knew Phillips was the man to get to know, but how? He decided to knock on Phillips's door. The Memphis Recording Service was a small building on 706 Union Avenue. Elvis had driven past it many times, hoping to catch a glimpse of Phillips or Rufus Thomas, a local disc jockey who had recorded with Sun, but he never saw them. So, a week after graduating, he found himself standing outside the studio, nervously walking up and down, peeking through the window, and then walking away again. Finally, he noticed a blonde lady watching him from behind the Venetian blinds. He was too embarrassed to walk away again. When he finally mustered the courage to enter, the lady smiled at him, as if she was rewarding him for his bravery. She looked like a kind but firm teacher, sitting behind a big typewriter in the tiny front office. There were other young men waiting, some with guitars hoping to be discovered. Elvis told the lady he wanted to make a recording for his mom's birthday, even though it was a little lie. After taking down his name and the phone number of the family next door, the Presleys didn't have a phone. She asked for $3.98 plus tax and let him into the studio. The studio was small, but to Elvis, it felt like a whole new world. The lady, whose name was Marion Kasker, tried to put him at ease. "So what kind of singer are you?" she asked. "I sing all kinds," he replied, not knowing how to answer. "But who do you sound like?" "I don't sound like nobody," he said, which was the truth. She set up the equipment and told him to start when he was ready. Elvis was so nervous his mouth was dry, but he managed to sing My Happiness, a love ballad that had been a hit a few years earlier. Then, because he got both sides of a 10-inch acetate disc for his money, he sang "That's When Your Heartaches Begin," a song by the Ink Spots. Marion Kasker secretly recorded his performance to play it for Sam Phillips, who was out recording a wedding. She wrote Timothy Sideburns next to his name, noting that he had a pleading, plaintive kind of sound. Elvis was excited to take his acetate home and play it over and over. His mom was proud, and he thought his dad might have been pleased too, even though Vernon never said much. But the recording left Elvis with more questions than answers. What kind of singer was he? He liked Dean Martin, Bing Crosby, and Hank Williams, but pop and country music didn't seem to mix. And then there was the rhythm and blues he listened to every night, and the gospel music he loved. It was all so different, and he wasn't sure where he fit in. Around this time, he started dating a girl named Dixie Locke. She was 15 and went to a different school. He overheard her and her friends talking about going skating, and he made sure to be there. They talked, and he took her home in the old car his dad had bought him for his 18th birthday. At first, Dixie's parents didn't want her to go out with him because of his loud clothes, long hair, and sideburns. But after a while, they relented, and they started going to the movies and listening to music in the park. Dixie was small, with long dark hair and a sweet laugh. She didn't mind how he looked and went with him to listen to gospel music. Sometimes they visited a Black Baptist church, standing in a little porch to watch and listen. Elvis loved the gospel singing and the sermons. He told Dixie that if he could sing like some of the soloists, he wouldn't want anything else. Elvis tried to audition for a gospel quartet at his church, but they turned him down, saying he couldn't sing harmony. He was upset but didn't give up. His first job after school was on an assembly line, but he didn't like it. He then became an apprentice electrician at Crown Electric, which suited his mom. But his mind was always elsewhere, dreaming about music. He kept asking Marion Kasker if she knew of any singing jobs. She never did, but she was always welcoming. A few months later, he recorded another couple of tracks and reminded her how to reach him by phone. Elvis never stopped working towards his dream. He visited several places around Memphis, asking if they needed a singer. At a little nightclub called the Hi-Hat, they told him he'd never make it. He was upset, but his mom always believed in him. His dad, however, seemed to shrug it off as if to say, "Well, what did you expect?" But Elvis was determined. He didn't want to be an electrician, even though his dad told him it was a good job. He was always dreaming, and he knew he couldn't keep his mind on the work. Then, one hot Saturday morning in June 1954, almost a year after he graduated, Marion Kasker called him at work. She wanted him to come to Sun by 3. He was there almost before she hung up. He'd said very little to Sam Phillips before that day. Phillips was always busy, and Elvis had only seen him from a distance. But that Saturday afternoon, everything changed. Phillips had the energy and drive of 3 men, and he seemed to know everything. Elvis was ready to show him what he could do. Elvis sat in the dark, his mind wandering back to that Saturday in 1954, when he first met Sam Phillips at Sun Records. Sam, a tall, charismatic man with a gift for words, had a way of making everyone feel important. But Elvis, like many before him, felt out of place. He remembered the intimidated look on the faces of the blues singers when they first stepped into Sun. They were just poor boys trying to make their mark, and so was he. Sam often told stories about his childhood on a farm in Alabama, where he learned the blues from a blind old man named Uncle Silas Payne. Sam saw his mission as giving a voice to the poor black musicians who had none. But he also had a dream of finding a white boy who could sing with the passion of a Negro. That's why Marion, Sam's secretary, had called Elvis in. She believed in him, and without her, none of what happened next would have been possible. Elvis spent the afternoon at Sun, singing Without You in every way he could. Sam, patient and encouraging, listened intently, always asking for one more try, but nothing seemed to work. Finally, Sam said, "Don't worry, Elvis, it isn't you. Maybe the song isn't what I thought it was. What else do you know? Just sing me something that means something to you." Elvis went through everything he could think of pop songs, spirituals, old favorites. He must have sat there for hours, with Sam watching him, concentrating. When it was over, Sam thanked him and told him to go home. Elvis left dejected, thinking he had failed his big chance, but life had other plans. A few days later, 2 members of the Blackwood Brothers Gospel Quartet were killed in a plane crash. The Blackwoods were stars to the Presleys, and Elvis was deeply affected. He couldn't help but wonder why this had happened. He drove his family to the funeral, lost in thought, and then went to the movies to escape his worries. That's when Gladys came to find him, saying that a guitarist named Scotty Moore had called, asking for an audition. Elvis went to Scotty's home the next day, a Sunday. Scotty was a quiet, unassuming guy who had already lived a full life. He was a war veteran, a musician, and a father, all at the age of 23. Scotty's friend Bill Black, a double bass player, joined them. They listened to Elvis sing, and though they didn't think he was anything special, they agreed to work with him. The following night, Elvis, Scotty, and Bill went to Sun Records. The studio was small and sticky, but Sam was determined to find the right sound. They played pop ballads, but nothing seemed to click. Then, late in the evening, Elvis started singing an old blues song by Big Boy Crudup, "That's All Right, Mama." Bill and Scotty joined in, and the 3 of them jammed. Sam heard the magic and told them to keep going. They rehearsed the song, and Sam gave them advice. "Keep it honest," he said. "Sing it plaintive and needy." They did 6 takes, and Sam chose the best one. They didn't know what they had created. It was a blend of blues and country, something entirely new. The next night, they returned to the studio to record a flip side. They tried Blue Moon, but it didn't feel right. Sam played That's All Right for Dewey Phillips, a disc jockey who played both black and white music. Dewey loved it and played it on his show, Red, Hot, and Blue. People called in asking for more. Dewey wanted to interview Elvis on the air. Elvis was terrified but went to the studio. Dewey asked him about his life, and Elvis told him about Tupelo, Humes High, and his church. After a while, Dewey said, "Thank you, Elvis," and the interview was over. Elvis was relieved, but he didn't know what to expect. The future was uncertain, but he had taken the first step. Elvis was learning a lot about the music world. Dewey, his friend, had kept it a secret that Elvis was on the air, knowing that if Elvis had known, he might have been too nervous to perform. Dewey also knew that some people who called in thought Elvis was black, because of how he sang. In those days, it mattered a lot what color you were, especially in music. Elvis and Dewey both wanted to make music that everyone could enjoy, no matter what they looked like. The next day, orders for That's All Right started pouring in from Memphis record stores. Sam Phillips, who owned Sun Records, realized they needed to record a second song for the other side of the record. They all got together again, trying out different songs. Sam was always looking for something new and different. It was only when Bill started playing Blue Moon of Kentucky that Sam got excited. They tried it slow first, but Sam wanted something more. So they sped it up and gave it a different feel. Sam loved it, and Elvis felt like he was really onto something. When Elvis got home late that night, his mom Gladys was still up waiting for him. She always waited for him to come home. Elvis couldn't wait to play the new record for her. With the echo Sam had added, Elvis sounded clearer and more free than ever before. They sat together, listening to the record, and it felt like a dream come true. The record became a hit in Memphis. It played on every radio station, and people were buying it everywhere. Some people loved That's All Right, while others preferred Blue Moon of Kentucky. For Elvis, the best part was seeing people buy the record and play it in the local jukeboxes. He even walked around town, watching people enjoy his music. Dixie, his girlfriend, heard Blue Moon of Kentucky on the radio while coming back from vacation. She was amazed and excited. She had no idea what had happened while she was away. She and Elvis had talked about their future, but now everything seemed different. They put their plans on hold and focused on the new opportunities. Sam Phillips, the owner of Sun Records, wanted to make sure everything was official. He brought Elvis, Scotty, and Bill to Taylor's Cafe to discuss joining the musicians' union and forming a legal band. Scotty would be the manager, taking 10% of the bookings, while Bill and Scotty would each get 25% of the remaining money, leaving Elvis with 50%. Elvis didn't really care about the details. He just wanted to make music. His dad, Vernon, had to sign the contract because Elvis was only 19. Despite the record's success, Elvis still had to work his job driving a truck. He and the band would rehearse in a room above a dry cleaner's where Scotty worked. It wasn't fancy, but it was exciting. One day, Elvis met his first journalist, and a photographer took his picture. He was thin and had bad acne, but he was determined to look better next time. Sam managed to get the band a spot at a concert at the Overton Park Shell Amphitheater. It was their first big performance, and Elvis was nervous. When they walked out on stage, he saw his parents and Dixie in the audience. He started playing That's All Right, and as he sang, he noticed the girls in the audience getting excited. He wasn't sure if they were laughing at him or cheering for him. After the show, Sam told him to do whatever he was doing again. Scotty explained that Elvis's movement on stage, leaning and shaking, was what got the girls excited. Elvis realized that moving around while performing was something special. After that, Elvis started working on his stage presence. He performed at local clubs, school gyms, and even a hospital. His performances were becoming more popular, and he was starting to see his record in the charts. He bought a new guitar, a Martin D18, which was the most expensive thing he had ever owned. He also started shopping at Lansky Brothers on Beale Street, where he could buy the same colorful clothes as the black singers he admired. By September, they needed a new record. They went back to the studio and recorded Good Rockin' Tonight and I Don't Care If the Sun Don't Shine. Sam had a drummer from another band come in to add some rhythm by patting a guitar case. Marion, who worked at Sun, even wrote an extra verse for I Don't Care If the Sun Don't Shine. It was a lot of work, but every day brought something new and exciting. For Elvis, that summer of 1954 was magical. He was 19, in love, and making music that people loved. It was a time he would always treasure. Elvis's world was changing fast, and he was right at the heart of it. He had left his job at Crown Electric and was now a full-time singer. His boss, Mr. Tipler, understood and supported him, even sending him to a hair salon to perfect his look. His mother, Gladys, was proud but worried. She wanted him to be careful and not get into trouble. Vernon, his father, was cautious, always asking, "What if it doesn't work out for you, son?" But Elvis knew he had to follow his dream. His parents were his world. He loved them deeply and never wanted them to feel ashamed of him. When he saw his mother taking pills to stay slim, he was concerned. He told her, "I will never be ashamed of you." Sometimes, he even took some of her pills to get the energy he needed for his shows. He didn't realize then that these pills would become a part of his life. Elvis's success was growing, and with it, the attention he got from fans. Girls screamed and swooned, and he loved it. But it also made him feel guilty, especially when he thought about his girlfriend, Dixie. She was supportive, but worried about all the attention he was getting. Elvis tried to reassure her, but deep down, he knew it was hard for her. Scotty and Bill, his bandmates, also left their jobs to focus on music. They started calling themselves the Blue Moon Boys. They were booked on the Louisiana Hayride, a big radio show that helped them reach a wider audience. They drove long hours, slept in cheap hotels, and played in small gyms and clubs. It was tough, but they were building their reputation. One of the biggest changes came when they added DJ Fontana on drums. He helped them keep the rhythm, especially when the crowd got so loud they couldn't hear Elvis singing. The band was getting bigger, and so was Elvis's popularity. By Christmas 1954, Bob Neal took over managing the group, and Elvis got his own car, a 1951 Lincoln. He had Elvis Presley Sun records painted on the sides, and they'd strap Bill's bass on top before hitting the road. They played as much as they could, and Elvis was always full of energy, even after shows. Sometimes he'd ask the guys to stop the car so he could walk and cool down. They always went with him for safety, knowing that some people were jealous of the attention he got. One night at an army base near Texarkana, a husband got angry because his wife was too excited during Elvis's performance. He punched Elvis, but other soldiers quickly stepped in to stop the fight. From then on, Scotty, Bill, and D.J. never let Elvis walk alone after a show. Elvis was becoming a handsome young man, and that brought its own set of problems. He was always on the go, and to stay awake, he took Benzedrine, a drug that was easy to get back then. He didn't know it then, but this would be the start of a pattern that would follow him for years. Despite the challenges, Elvis was determined to make it big. He was inventing a new kind of music, a new kind of performer, and he was just getting started. The road ahead was long, but he was ready for whatever it brought.